Pope Francis, who dedicated his entire life to serving the church and the community, was always known for his humility and simple lifestyle, a stark contrast to the grandeur often associated with high-ranking religious leaders. But when he passed away, a surprising truth left the world in awe. Though he left behind no golden crown or material treasures, he did leave a legacy so profound that even his own family could not hold back their tears. A secret trust fund, managed quietly over many years, is not merely a material inheritance. It is a symbol of love, sacrifice, and the quiet loyalty of a brother, a spiritual father, and a deeply responsible leader. This isn't a story about wealth or power, but about a profound legacy, written in silence, yet resonating with powerful meaning. If you find this story thought-provoking and believe more people should know the hidden truth behind the Vatican walls, don't forget to leave a comment with the number 1 if you feel a connection to Pope Francis or were moved by his emotional journey, or 0 if you see things differently. Like and share so your friends can follow this powerful story too. Since becoming Pope, he has refused to accept the high salary offered by the Vatican. This amount, around $32,000 per month, was considered inconsistent with his beliefs. He didn't want to be surrounded by wealth or power, which is reflected in his avoidance of lavish renovations and even choosing to live in a small room instead of the apostolic palace. All of this has shaped Pope Francis into a humble figure, accessible to everyone. Pope Francis always acted according to the principle, the shepherd must smell like the sheep. He frequently met with and interacted with the poor, without regard to social class. He also chose to travel without a retinue. This is why images of him driving a Ford Focus or donating his Harley-Davidson to charity have become powerful symbols of simplicity and his love for the community. He showed that wealth was not the main goal of life. Although the Vatican owns substantial assets, ranging from $10 to $15 billion, these are not typically associated with Pope Francis personally. These assets belong to the organization, not to him. He refused to live in the palace or dine like royalty. Instead, the Pope dedicated his time to visiting the homeless and those forgotten by society. These actions reflect the minimalist lifestyle that he has pursued throughout his life, with no personal assets. Many within the Vatican believed that if Pope Francis left anything behind, it could only be a few books and a Bible. However, signs from public documents contradicted this view. By the time of his death, people began to question his unused salary and the financial decisions he may have made. Rumors about him having kept a portion of assets began to spread, sparking curiosity and controversy. Due to his simple lifestyle, Pope Francis always avoided discussions about retirement benefits, assets, or trust funds. He just wanted his life to be simple and humble, which was reflected in his everyday actions. However, when he passed away, many were surprised to discover that what he left behind might not be as simple as they thought. A special envelope caused a woman in Argentina to shed tears, raising the question of whether there was something deeper behind his seemingly simple exterior. Pope Francis lived a remarkable life with noble values of humility and simplicity. His message was not only about living closely with the poor, but also about rejecting luxury and power. Instead, he encouraged everyone to lead a simple, pure life, free from materialism. However, the events following his death suggest that there may still be many unanswered questions regarding the financial decisions and legacies he left behind. Because while the Pope may not have cared about wealth, he did care about people, especially those who stood by him behind the white robes and global stage lights. And some of those people, it turns out, were never forgotten. Even in silence, Pope Francis may have set something aside, not for himself, but for someone more important than gold. And that, well, that changes everything. The quiet financial habits that go unnoticed. It's easy to assume that someone who refuses their salary is simply letting the money disappear. But things at the Vatican don't work that way. When Pope Francis declined his monthly allowance, that money didn't just vanish into thin air. In fact, those close to the administrative operations of the Vatican say there's a little-known mechanism in place. When a pope refuses their salary, those funds are quietly redirected. Sometimes it's given to charities, sometimes to funds, and sometimes, if the Pope allows, to accounts designated for future use. We attended the papal audience because we wanted to present him with a certificate, making him an honorary member of our San Cassiano blood donor volunteer group. Officially, Pope Francis has always refused to take a salary, but behind the scenes it seems the Vatican is still budgeting for that salary. Those working at the Vatican and living there or in Rome are said to receive a salary of about 4,000 to 5,000 euros a month, and according to internal sources, a portion of that money over time has been directed into a trust fund under his name, not for personal use, but for discretionary spending. The prudence by nature has never been disclosed or publicized. It sounds paradoxical. A person preaching poverty but still legally possessing the means to earn 6 figures a year. The path of Jesus Christ began on the outskirts. It reached out to the poor and with the poor, extended to everyone else. But Francis never spoke about optics. He spoke about intention. And intention can hide a lot right in front of your eyes. Most popes before him spent freely in their role, using allowances for travel, gifts, personal expenses, and sometimes even planning for retirement. In contrast, Francis directed much of the money allocated to him towards social causes. Especially for causes tied to Argentina, where he remained emotionally connected. He was the Pope of the world, but we had him in Argentina for over 60 years. Homes for orphaned children, medical care for poor families, scholarships for young seminarians from underfunded regions. Some of these donations have been made public. Most have not. What's even more unusual is that Francis never established a personal fund in his name, unlike many modern religious leaders or public figures. He didn't build a monument to himself, but now there is evidence showing that he worked through intermediaries. 2 of them are believed to be connected to the financial networks of the Jesuits in Latin America, who helped establish and maintain a quietly growing trust fund over the years. So, why keep it a secret? Some insiders suggest that it was his way of staying true to his vow of poverty while still acting as a benefactor. To the public, he is the Pope who lives in a guest house, but privately, he may have been managing the only inheritance he could justify, one that was entirely built for others. However, few would have guessed that the money had once been intended for family. Pope Francis rarely spoke about his relatives, and when he did, it was with discreet affection. He once inadvertently mentioned his sister Maria Elena in an interview, calling her the only one who remembered who I was before everything happened. That remark didn't attract attention at the time, but now it does, because Maria Elena lives quietly in Argentina and has never received any benefits from her brother's position. She lives modestly, even as her health begins to decline. She never appears at Vatican events, never shows up in international media, and never seeks attention. But sources now indicate that Francis still kept in regular contact with her, even writing to her weekly. These weren't just love letters, but also messages of reassurance, perhaps to prepare her for something he knew one day she would receive. It turns out that something had been growing. Year after year, as the public marveled at the humility of the Pope, the trust remained unaffected. Reports suggest it was invested cautiously. There were no risky investment portfolios, no lavish profits, just steady, quiet accumulation. Until, after more than a decade, it grew into something substantial, no longer just a symbolic gesture. Now, with Pope Francis gone, these quiet financial habits are beginning to surface. And they don't look like the actions of a man without a plan. They resemble a farewell gift that had been carefully prepared. And it only took one envelope to reveal it. His sister, his confidant, Maria Elena Bergoglio, never saw herself as the sister of a pope. For her, Jorge was simply her brother, the one who took her to school, protected her from the bullies in their neighborhood, and then, after their father passed away, stepped into the role of a second father without ever saying a word. Their bond had been formed long before there was the white cassock and the papal ring. It started with the quiet routines of Buenos Aires, in a home that echoed more with prayers than wealth. When Jorge became Pope Francis in 2013, Maria Elena didn't fly to Rome for the inauguration. Not because she didn't want to, but because he had asked her not to. According to her, he said that the money needed for travel should be spent on those who are in need. If the story of Pope Francis and this simple yet profound family love touches your heart, be sure to like the video to help spread the message of love. Share this video with your loved ones, because sometimes the most precious thing we can give each other is sincere care. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss meaningful human stories like this one. Pray at home, he told her. That's more than enough. And she did so every day. They never lost touch. Even when the Pope's duties pulled him into global matters through handwritten letters, short phone calls, and occasional recorded messages, the siblings kept in contact. He never signed his letters as Pope Francis, always just H. And he often ended with a phrase she grew to cherish: Cuídate, hermanita. Take care, little sister. Her life in Argentina remained very quiet. No cameras outside her house, no exclusive interviews. Sometimes the media would try to find her, but she never gave them much to work with. A quiet woman with a peaceful life. She raised her family modestly, worked when she could, and fought her own health crisis, including a stroke that nearly stole her voice. Throughout it all, he was there, not directly, but in prayer, and often on the other end of the line. There is a certain kind of loyalty that doesn't make the headlines. Maria Elena is the embodiment of that loyalty. She never asked her brother for favors, never tried to exploit his position. She even declined invitations to Vatican events on principle, stating that she didn't want to bother him or create the impression that she was enjoying privileges that others were not. But Francis never forgot her sacrifices, and he certainly never forgot that she was the last living member of his direct family. He carried that knowledge quietly, just as he carried his own burdens. And in his final years, especially after some health concerns, those close to him noticed a subtle shift. He began asking more questions about legal matters, trust, and how to ensure everything was carried out quietly but purposefully. He never publicly mentioned her name in these conversations, but there was no doubt who he was thinking of. And when his health sharply declined in early 2025, Vatican aides confirmed that one of his final personal requests involved sending a document to Argentina via secure courier for a woman who had never stepped into the apostolic palace. That woman, of course, was Maria Elena. When the sealed envelope arrived, she didn't open it right away. According to neighbors, she held it in her hands for a long time, pressing it against her chest as if it were a final embrace. No one knows what's inside, not yet. But what was clear, even then, was that the bond between them had endured everything: the church, fame, distance, and even death. She wasn't just the Pope's sister. She was the one person who never allowed him to forget who he was before the world called him the Holy Father. And now, she was about to discover what he had quietly left behind. The envelope had arrived. The world held its breath. Pope Francis has passed away, and with his death came solemn ceremonies, a public funeral, and the quiet stillness behind the doors of the Vatican. The Pope's apartments were closed, the bells rang. Flags were lowered to half-mast across the most powerful churches in the world, a momentous event for 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide. Pope Francis had died, but in Argentina the mourning was quieter, more private. Maria Elena, his sister, did not fly to Rome. Her health did not permit it. Instead, she stayed at home, surrounded by silence, until a man in a dark suit rang her doorbell with an envelope in hand. He said nothing, merely nodded and left. It looked no different from a thick cream-colored document sealed with a red wax stamp. No royal display, no title. But this envelope would soon ignite one of the most unexpected twists in the legacy of the humble Pope. While Maria Elena held the envelope, nearly 7,000 miles away, another revelation was unfolding on American television. Jesse Waters appeared on screen, sitting at his desk in the studio with a stack of papers before him and the trademark self-satisfied smile that always seemed to signal something big about to happen. His opening statement was very direct. We have the will and the final testament of Pope Francis. And let's just say, not everyone was expecting this. Pope Francis left behind an inheritance that made his family cry. At first, viewers might have thought this would be a theological segment, perhaps a final message, a quote, something spiritual. But what followed seemed more like a courtroom drama. Waters opened the document and highlighted a line. He stated that this was the legal acknowledgement of a trust fund managed for over a decade, with clear instructions to be allocated to one individual, Maria Elena Bergoglio. On the screen behind him appeared an analysis, nothing too detailed, but enough to cause a stir. A fund managed by the Vatican, annual deposits, accumulated interest, a figure that hasn't been officially disclosed but is speculated to be in the high six figures, possibly low seven figures, reserved for one woman and, more importantly, for a purpose. Waters leaned in. According to sources familiar with the trust, Pope Francis spent years quietly redirecting unused papal allowances, royalties from his writings, and personal donations into this account. Not for himself, not for luxury, but for the sister he never stopped writing to and for the people with whom she continued to live. The reaction was immediate. Across social media, people were confused, curious, and in many cases deeply moved. Why would a man who lived in poverty leave behind a small fortune? One user asked. Because he didn't store treasure for himself, another replied. He's sowing it for others. Meanwhile, in Buenos Aires, Maria Elena finally opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in the unmistakable handwriting of her brother. It didn't start with any formalities. It simply said, "Hermanita, my little sister." In the letter, he thanked her for her silence, strength, and sacrifice. He wrote about their parents, their childhood, and how he never stopped thinking about the time she gave him her only coat during a winter storm when they were both teenagers. "You gave me warmth," he wrote, "so now I return it." Attached to the letter were official documents confirming the transfer of the trust fund, not just to her, but also to a joint council that she would chair along with local Argentine clergy to use the funds for health care and housing initiatives in their neighborhood. "This is not wealth," he wrote. "It is simply love in another form." She cried, not because of the money, but because it was exactly what he would do. Jesse Waters concluded his segment with a statement that even his critics found surprising. Perhaps the Pope did not accept a salary, but it seemed he had found a way to turn silence into something loud, something that made his family cry for all the right reasons. And the story is far from over. It's not even close to being finished. Reactions have come in from all over the world. The responses are a strange mix of awe, confusion, admiration, and from some corners, skepticism. How could a pope who rejected luxury, turned down a salary, and made humility his personal brand do this? He left behind a trust fund large enough to build a hospital. The Vatican issued a brief but firm statement. Pope Francis had managed his personal grants and royalties according to canon law. All allocations had been approved through the appropriate internal channels. But that didn't stop the speculation. News agencies scrambled for more details. European newspapers reported sensationally on Francis's final gift and the Pope's hidden trust for the people. In Buenos Aires, local news stations set up camp outside Maria Elena's house. She didn't speak to the cameras, but the neighbors did. One woman, who had known her for many decades, said that Maria Elena always said she needed nothing from her brother. She only prayed for his safety, and now he had given her everything. Online, the story spread, not because of the money involved, but because of the person who gave it. People weren't used to seeing a spiritual leader handle finances in a way that truly aligned with his values. He didn't spend on art, cars, or real estate. One commenter wrote, "He gave it to someone who will make sure it stays where his heart is." Of course, not everyone reacted positively. Some critics raised questions about the optics. A Vatican watcher asked, "If this trust existed, why was it never made public? Why keep it hidden?" Skeptics raised concerns about transparency, especially in a church that has long struggled with financial scandals. But even they had to admit that it seemed Francis didn't benefit from any of it. If anything, it appeared he intentionally removed himself from the equation. Others focused on the letter, which was now partially being released by the family at the urging of a local archdiocese. In it, Francis clearly wrote, "Serving the Church is serving those who wait in silence." Maria Elena had waited in silence all her life. This was for her and for those she never stopped caring for. It wasn't poetic, it was personal. Some religious scholars pointed out how rare this gesture was. A Vatican historian said that typically, when a pope passes away, their legacy is debated in terms of theology, reforms, and the pope's message. Rarely is it just a handwritten letter and a trust fund that isn't even tied to the church. This was a different kind of legacy. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from where Pope Francis might have least expected it: the next generation of clergy. A group of young priests in Colombia held a prayer service in his memory and read aloud his letter. Then, they began organizing a fundraising campaign inspired by what they called the Bergoglio method, giving quietly, without recognition, but with a tremendous impact. Even Jesse Waters, who had sparked the entire conversation, returned to the topic a few nights later. He aired a short clip from the first segment and then added, "I've reported on popes, politicians, and billionaires, but this one managed to give more than all of them without telling anyone." In the weeks that followed, donations poured into the small community fund that Maria Elena was asked to oversee. She declined to give interviews but issued a statement through the archdiocese. "My brother lived in silence, he died in peace, and now through this, he speaks again, not through power, but through kindness." Clearly, the story has touched hearts. Not because a pope left behind a fortune, but because this time, the fortune wasn't about wealth. It was about love, loyalty, and the quiet strength of remembering where you come from. A legacy, not a golden crown, not a royal inheritance. Just a letter, a trust, and a legacy that rewrote everything people thought they knew about Pope Francis. While headlines chased numbers and experts debated motives, Maria Elena said little. She didn't need to speak. Her tears said more than any press conference ever could. She had spent her whole life in the background, never photographed at the Vatican, never given an official title, never asking for anything. And in the end, her brother, who bore the weight of the church, the weight of history, and the expectations of billions of believers, chose to leave it all, not in a monument, not in a statue, but in her hands. The hands that once wiped away his tears, gently cradled his face, and wrote back every time he sent letters from Rome. The trust he created was not just about money. It was a message. It said, "I saw you. I didn't forget." It said, "This is for the times you were silent, for the times you gave when no one was looking, for the life you lived in the shadows of mine but never complained." It said, "Thank you." Jesse Waters, the one who first brought this story to light, didn't sensationalize the ending. In his final broadcast, he looked straight into the camera and said, "This is not a change. This is the truest version of Francis. He didn't leave gold, he left dignity, and that is what makes his family cry." As the world moves on, as a new conclave approaches and the Church prepares for the next chapter, there is a story still quietly unfolding in Argentina. The story of a small trust now overflowing with donations, of clinics being built, shelters being expanded, and a woman who never sought attention, now quietly, faithfully, and without ceremony carrying out her brother's final blessing. With the legacy that Pope Francis leaves behind, we not only see a man who gave up everything to serve, but also a model of how we can live and give without seeking recognition. His story reminds us that true humility is not about lack, but about living meaningfully, focusing on lasting values rather than fleeting things. His quiet actions, from building the trust fund to supporting the community, are small steps that create big changes in the lives of those around him. So, the legacy that Pope Francis leaves behind is not just for his family, but for all of us. Let this story inspire us to find quiet, sincere ways to contribute to society, not for fame or personal gain, but for a better world. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of quiet kindness, unconditional loyalty, and love without fanfare, don't keep it to yourself. Please hit like to honor a simple yet great life. Share it to spread the legacy of Pope Francis, a legacy not recorded in money but in acts of love.